My name is Rachel, and for as long as I could remember, I had lived in the shadow of my brother. Alex, he had a way of effortlessly drawing attention. The kind of charm that made our parents beam with pride. The kind of confidence that made people hang on his every word. And me. I had always been the responsible one, the quiet achiever, the one who worked hard, did my best, and expected that, eventually, my parents would notice. I was wrong. The night of the party began like any other family gathering, or so I thought. The house was buzzing with laughter and conversation. The kind of noise that should have made me feel welcome, safe, and part of something bigger. I had dressed carefully, hoping that maybe this time, they would see me, appreciate me, and acknowledge the effort I had put into my life. But as soon as I walked in, I felt a familiar wave of invisibility wash over me. Alex was already there, standing in the center of the room like a king, laughing at a joke only he found funny, while everyone around him nodded and smiled. I tried to shake it off. I reminded myself that I had my own achievements, my own path, my own successes, and they mattered just as much. But the feeling of being overlooked was stronger than any logical argument I could make. The party seemed to go on. 4 hours, with Alex stealing the spotlight at every turn. And then, the moment came that would change everything. My parents called for attention, asking everyone to gather around. I instinctively stepped back, thinking it might be something celebratory for the whole family. But as they began speaking, I realized it was about him. They handed Alex an envelope. I couldn't hear the words at first, just the sound of laughter and applause. And then I understood. $2.5 million. $2.5 million given to my brother, my parents' favorite. The one they had always praised, always uplifted, always supported while I had spent my life being measured against him, and always falling short in their eyes. And then the words came, sharp and cutting, echoing in the room and in my mind. You're a failure. Everything inside me shattered at once. I wanted to scream, to cry, to make them see me, make them understand that I had worked hard, that I had achieved things on my own, things that mattered. But no sound came out. I just stood there, frozen, as Alex laughed and thanked our parents. Oblivious to the storm raging inside me, the room felt suffocating. I could hear people whispering, some congratulating Alex, some murmuring about the sheer amount of money. But all I could feel was the emptiness and humiliation. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, and a sense of anger began to rise, mingled with hurt and disbelief. I had always known my parents had favorites, but hearing the words "you're a failure" spoken aloud, in front of everyone, made it real, in a way I had never experienced before. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. Grandma Rose. She had been watching quietly, her hands clasped, her expression calm, yet intense. Like she had seen this coming all along. She walked over and gently placed her hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me in a way nothing else could. She leaned in close and whispered, "Rachel, don't let them define you. There's a way to show them who you really are." Her words were like a spark in the dark. In that moment, a part of me ignited, a part of me I had buried under years of comparisons and feelings of inadequacy. I realized that this humiliation, this cruel display of favoritism, was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. I would show them, and I would do it in a way they would never forget. As the party continued, I stayed quiet, observing. I watched Alex bask in the attention, oblivious to the fire growing inside me. I watched my parents smile at him, still blind to the hurt they had caused me. And I began to plan. Revenge, I decided, would not come from anger or shouting or tears. It would come from intelligence, patience, and strategy. That night, I went to my room and sat on my bed, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Every slight, every comparison, every time I had felt invisible while Alex was praised, it all came flooding back. I realized that I had two choices: continue feeling like a failure, or take control and prove that I was capable of more than they could ever imagine. I started by observing. I began to notice the small details in my parents' behavior, the way they managed their finances, the way they trusted Alex, without question. I noticed Alex's arrogance, his overconfidence, his tendency to flaunt his success without understanding the responsibilities behind it. Every small observation was a piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle I intended to solve and use to my advantage. I also reflected on my own strengths. I was organized, meticulous, and intelligent. I had skills they had underestimated, talents they had ignored. And most importantly, I had patience I would need if I wanted to execute the kind of plan that would leave them speechless. The days that followed were spent quietly gathering information. I started with small things, asking questions about investments, rereading old documents, noting inconsistencies, and making mental notes of opportunities where mistakes had been made. I wasn't just gathering information for revenge, I was learning, growing, and preparing myself to step into the power they had always denied me. Alex, of course, continued to live in his bubble. He boasted about the money, flaunted it on social media, and made subtle digs at me whenever he could, but I ignored it. I let him expose his arrogance further, knowing that every boast, every careless move, only strengthened my plan. Grandma Rose remained my silent ally. She didn't intervene directly, but her presence was a constant reminder that I was not alone. Her earlier words echoed in my mind. There's a way to show them who you really are. And I knew she was right. This wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about reclaiming my dignity and proving my worth. I began documenting everything meticulously. I created folders, spreadsheets, and detailed notes on every financial move. Every favor given to Alex. Every oversight by my parents. I even started reaching out discreetly to people who could help me, advisors and professionals who could validate what I was discovering. Each piece of evidence added weight to the plan. Each observation sharpened my strategy. As the weeks passed, my patience paid off. I began noticing cracks in my parents' management, small mistakes Alex had made in his arrogance, and patterns of favoritism that had left them vulnerable. I realized that they had underestimated me in every way, and that underestimation was the key to my eventual success. Finally, the day came when I felt ready to make my move. I didn't rush. I knew that the perfect revenge wasn't loud or impulsive, it was precise and calculated. I had spent months building the foundation, and now everything was aligned. I would show them that I was not a failure, that I was intelligent, capable, and unshakable, and I would do it in a way that left no room for argument. After the party, life didn't return to normal. Every time I saw my parents, every time I heard Alex brag or joke about the money, I felt the same anger and humiliation simmering beneath the surface. But this time, I refused to react impulsively. I refused to let their words define me. Instead, I spent hours reflecting, analyzing, and planning. I asked myself, what would it take to turn the tables? How could I show them, once and for all, that I was far from a failure? I began by looking at every aspect of my family's life with a new perspective. I watched my parents carefully, noting their habits, their weaknesses, and their blind spots. I paid attention to the way they managed their wealth, the way they trusted Alex blindly, and the areas where mistakes had been made or opportunities overlooked. Every careless comment, every boastful remark, every confident smile from Alex became a clue, a piece of a larger puzzle that I intended to solve. I also reflected on my own past. I thought about all the times I had been dismissed, all the achievements that had gone unnoticed, and all the moments when I had been compared to Alex and found wanting. Instead of letting these memories weigh me down, I used them as fuel. They reminded me why this revenge wasn't just about money or recognition, it was about proving my own worth, reclaiming my dignity, and finally showing everyone that underestimating me had been the gravest mistake of their lives. I started my preparation quietly, meticulously documenting everything I could find. I went through old family financial records, invoices, and contracts, noting inconsistencies and areas where mismanagement had occurred. I reviewed past investments, traced transactions, and began creating a detailed map of my parents' financial world. It was like piecing together a puzzle, each small discovery bringing me closer to the plan I was building. At the same time, I studied Alex. I analyzed his behavior, his arrogance, and his overconfidence. He had always relied on charm and luck, never thinking carefully about the consequences of his actions. Every boast, every careless decision, became an opportunity for me to use later. I realized that while Alex had money and attention, he lacked foresight, discipline, and strategy, and that's where I would have the advantage. I reached out discreetly to professionals who could help me validate my findings. Lawyers, financial advisors, and accountants became my silent allies. I asked questions carefully, framing them as curiosity rather than suspicion, and slowly gathered confirmation for the weaknesses I had identified. It was a delicate process, one misstep, and they could have dismissed me entirely. But I was patient, knowing that precision mattered more than speed. During this time, I also honed my own skills. I took courses in financial management, legal structures, and strategic planning. I wanted to ensure that when the time came to confront my parents, I would do so with authority, knowledge, and undeniable evidence. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was preparing to step into a version of myself that they had never truly seen. Every day, I tested my patience. I listened to Alex boast, watched him make mistakes, and smiled quietly as I imagined the day when all of it would work in my favor. I reminded myself constantly that revenge wasn't about anger, it was about timing. Every observation, every piece of evidence, every carefully noted weakness brought me closer to the moment when I would reclaim my power. Grandma Rose continued to guide me in her subtle way. She didn't interfere directly, but her presence was a constant reassurance. I remembered her words, "There's a way to show them who you really are." I realized that her advice was more than encouragement, it was a blueprint for the revenge I was about to execute. I needed patience, strategy, and intelligence to outmaneuver those who had underestimated me for so long. I began building a timeline. I knew that the confrontation needed to be strategic, executed at a time when their defenses were down and my evidence was undeniable. I created charts, lists, and notes detailing the steps I would take, the documents I would present, and the moments where I could plant doubt in their minds. This wasn't just revenge, it was a carefully orchestrated revelation, designed to leave them stunned, speechless, and unable to dismiss me any longer. One evening, as I sat at my desk surrounded by papers and spreadsheets, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about exposing Alex or humiliating my parents. It was about proving to myself that I had the courage, the intelligence, and the resilience to take control of my life. The thrill of planning, of uncovering vulnerabilities, and of building a strategy became addictive. I was no longer the invisible daughter I had once been. I was Rachel, the one who would turn years of humiliation into empowerment. I also considered the emotional side of my plan. I knew that part of my revenge had to include revealing the truth in a way that would force my parents and Alex to confront their own arrogance. It wasn't enough to expose financial mismanagement or favoritism, they needed to feel the consequences of underestimating me. I imagined the look on their faces when they realized that the failure they had dismissed had been quietly preparing to outsmart them all along. As the weeks turned into months, my plan took shape. I had compiled evidence, validated my findings, observed Alex's weaknesses, and learned every nuance of my parents' decision-making. I had transformed anger and humiliation into strategy and preparation. I had become patient, precise, and powerful. And I knew that when the time came, I would not just reveal the truth, I would orchestrate it in a way that left no room for denial, no opportunity for them to dismiss me, and no question about my worth. During this time, I also strengthened my own life outside of the family drama. I worked on my career, my skills, and my social network. I knew that part of true revenge was not just proving them wrong but creating a life so strong, so undeniable, that my success could not be ignored. I became focused, disciplined, and unstoppable, knowing that each step I took was building toward the moment when my parents and Alex would finally understand who I really was. Grandma Rose remained my silent mentor throughout it all. Her quiet confidence and unwavering belief in me were more powerful than any words she could have spoken. I remembered her advice constantly. Patience, strategy, intelligence, these were my weapons, and I wielded them carefully, knowing that the ultimate victory depended not on rash action but on precise execution. By the time I felt ready to move to the next stage, I had transformed completely. I was no longer the hurt, overlooked daughter. I was a strategist, a planner, and a force to be reckoned with. The humiliation of that party had planted a seed, and over the months, I had nurtured it into a fire that would finally burn away the doubt and underestimation that had defined my family's treatment of me for years. By the time the next few weeks rolled around, I had settled into a quiet rhythm of preparation. Each day I spent observing, analyzing, and quietly documenting every detail about my family, Alex, and the way my parents managed their wealth. I had notebooks stacked with spreadsheets, emails, contracts, and personal observations. Each note, each connection I discovered, brought me closer to the day when I would finally claim the power I had been denied. I started by examining the patterns of favoritism that had always benefited Alex. My parents trusted him implicitly, assuming his success was effortless and permanent. They never questioned his decisions, never checked the details, and never imagined that someone like me could uncover their blind spots. That blind trust became the foundation of my plan. I realized that I could use it, carefully, to manipulate events without anyone noticing. Alex, as expected, continued to boast, flaunt, and show off. He posted on social media, bragged to distant relatives, and subtly mocked me whenever he could. But I didn't react. Instead, I documented everything. Every arrogance-filled comment, every careless display, every slip in judgment became a piece of evidence I could use later. I began imagining how these small cracks could form a larger picture of failure and mismanagement, one that I would reveal strategically. I also began building connections quietly. I reached out to family advisors, lawyers, and accountants who had previously worked with my parents. I framed my questions as curiosity, as if I were simply trying to learn about investments or family strategies. No one suspected that I was collecting precise evidence to expose vulnerabilities. Every confirmation I received, every document I accessed, became another tool in my growing arsenal. During this time, I honed my own skills further. I studied legal frameworks, financial strategies, and corporate structures. I wanted to ensure that when I finally revealed the truth, my knowledge would be undeniable. I wanted to be more than just a daring daughter seeking revenge. I wanted to be a strategist who could outmaneuver years of ignorance, favoritism, and arrogance. I also started planning the psychological aspect of my revenge. I knew that exposing financial mismanagement and favoritism alone would not have the full impact. I had to make my parents and Alex feel the consequences of underestimating me. I visualized the exact sequence of events, how I would reveal the evidence, what reactions I would anticipate, and how I would control the narrative so that no one could dismiss me. Every scenario played out in my mind until I felt confident that nothing could go wrong. Subtlety became my greatest tool. I began dropping hints during conversations, asking questions that seemed innocent but were carefully calculated to unsettle my parents and Alex. I made casual comments about potential oversights, about financial decisions, and about accountability. Each remark planted seeds of doubt in their minds, without them realizing that I was orchestrating the entire situation. I observed their reactions carefully, noting every flinch, hesitation, or moment of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Alex continued to make mistakes. He overestimated his intelligence, trusted his charm blindly, and flaunted the very opportunities I was preparing to use against him. Every careless act, every boastful post, every assumption of superiority became a building block for my plan. I documented it all meticulously, knowing that each piece of evidence would become crucial when the time came to reveal the truth. I also strengthened my own life outside of family politics. I worked on my career, my skills, and my personal brand. I wanted to ensure that when I finally emerged victorious, my success would be undeniable. The revenge I was planning wasn't just about exposing my family, it was about proving my worth, reclaiming my dignity, and building a life they could not ignore or dismiss. Grandma Rose remained a quiet presence, observing without interfering, guiding me subtly with her wisdom. I remembered her words constantly: patience, strategy, intelligence. That is how you show them who you really are. I repeated them to myself like a mantra, using them to maintain focus and discipline. She had taught me that the most powerful revenge isn't loud or impulsive, it's precise, calculated, and unstoppable. As the weeks turned into months, my plan became more concrete. I had gathered undeniable evidence, documented patterns of favoritism, and exposed mistakes that had been hidden under years of arrogance. I had also built a psychological strategy, ensuring that when I revealed the truth, it would have maximum impact. Every detail, every moment of observation, every piece of research was aligned perfectly for the moment of confrontation. I began to practice my presentation. I rehearsed how I would calmly reveal the evidence, how I would anticipate objections, and how I would maintain control over the narrative. I imagined the shock on their faces, the disbelief, and the realization that the daughter they had dismissed as a failure had quietly prepared to outsmart them completely. The thought made my pulse quicken, not with anger, but with anticipation, pride, and satisfaction. I also prepared for the social consequences. I knew that the revelation wouldn't just affect my parents and Alex, it would ripple through family, friends, distant relatives, and even colleagues. I wanted to ensure that the truth would be seen clearly, that no one could dismiss me, and that my victory would be undeniable. Everything was planned: timing, delivery, evidence, and aftermath. By the time I felt ready to move forward, I had transformed completely. I was no longer the overlooked, underestimated daughter. I was a strategist, a planner, and a force to be reckoned with. Every humiliation, every insult, every moment of being called a failure had been transformed into preparation, patience, and precision. I was ready to strike, and when I did, it would be perfect. The first step in executing my plan was subtle, but powerful. I didn't want to alert my parents or Alex that I was about to strike. That would ruin the impact. Instead, I began planting small pieces of evidence, creating a trail that would lead to the ultimate revelation. I carefully placed financial reports where my parents would find them, left notes in folders they frequently reviewed, and sent emails to advisors that seemed innocent but subtly highlighted areas of concern. Each move was calculated, designed to make them question their assumptions without realizing I was orchestrating the entire situation. Alex, of course, remained completely oblivious. He continued his reckless behavior, boasting about investments he didn't fully understand, making careless decisions, and flaunting wealth he hadn't truly earned. Every careless act became another layer of my plan, another piece of the puzzle that would make my eventual confrontation undeniable. I documented everything meticulously. His arrogance and oversight were my allies, and I knew exactly how to leverage them. Meanwhile, I started testing my parents' reactions. I asked questions that seemed innocent but were designed to reveal cracks in their confidence. "Have you considered reviewing that account again?" I would ask, or, "I noticed something interesting in the last investment report. Did you see that?" Each remark was subtle, almost conversational, but carefully designed to make them second-guess their decisions. I could see the unease begin to grow in their expressions, though they had no idea why. Grandma Rose watched quietly, always present but never interfering. Her calm presence reminded me to maintain patience and precision. I repeated her mantra, in my mind constantly: patience, strategy, intelligence. Every step I took was aligned with those principles. I wasn't just seeking revenge, I was proving my worth in a way that would be undeniable and permanent. Weeks went by, and I continued building my case, planting evidence, and observing reactions. I discovered a hidden bank account, small errors in tax filings, and oversights in investment decisions that my parents had completely overlooked. I meticulously documented each detail, ensuring that when the time came, I would have a comprehensive, irrefutable case. I also began reaching out to professionals quietly, confirming my findings and ensuring that every detail was legally and financially sound. Lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors all became silent allies in my plan. I framed every inquiry as curiosity, never revealing the true purpose. They provided insights, validation, and strategies that strengthened my position. By the time I was ready, I had built a fortress of evidence that could not be denied. Socially, I positioned myself carefully. I cultivated subtle influence among family, friends, and distant relatives, planting impressions of competence, intelligence, and authority. I knew that when I finally revealed my findings, the impact would extend beyond the immediate family. Everyone would see the truth, and no one would be able to dismiss me as a failure. The psychological aspect of my plan was equally important. I began crafting a narrative in my mind, imagining how I would present the evidence, anticipate objections, and maintain control. I visualized the shock on my parents' faces, the disbelief in Alex's eyes, and the growing realization that I had been underestimated for years. I practiced remaining calm, composed, and authoritative, knowing that my demeanor would amplify the effect of my revelations. Finally, I knew the perfect moment had arrived. I arranged a family gathering under the guise of a casual discussion about finances and future plans. My parents assumed it was another attempt by me to complain or seek validation. Alex assumed it was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, just another moment where he could show off and reinforce his superiority. Neither of them had any idea what awaited them. I began calmly, presenting the evidence, piece by piece. I showed financial mismanagement, highlighted favoritism, and revealed Alex's oversights with precision. I did not yell, accuse, or raise my voice. I simply presented facts, carefully documented and verified. The impact was immediate. My parents' expressions shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to stunned silence. Alex's confident smirk faltered as he realized that the carefully curated image of success he had built was fragile and completely exposed. Grandma Rose stood quietly nearby, a proud smile on her face. As I maintained control of the room, I could see the disbelief and the dawning realization in my parents' eyes. The daughter they had dismissed as a failure had quietly orchestrated a plan that exposed their mistakes, highlighted favoritism, and demonstrated intelligence and strategy they had never seen in me. I allowed the room to absorb the impact fully. Every subtle action, every planted piece of evidence, every observation I had recorded over months culminated in this moment. My parents had no words. Alex had no comeback. I had turned humiliation into empowerment, patience into strategy, and intelligence into undeniable authority. By the end of the confrontation, I had achieved more than revenge. I had reclaimed my dignity, proved my worth, and demonstrated that being underestimated by those who should have supported me was no longer a limitation. I had orchestrated a revelation so precise and powerful that it left no room for denial. My parents and Alex were forced to see me not as a failure, but as a force they had foolishly underestimated. The aftermath was immediate and transformative. My parents began to reevaluate their assumptions, their favoritism, and their treatment of both me and Alex. Alex, for the first time, realized that success built on arrogance and blind trust could be fragile and that intelligence, preparation, and patience were more powerful than charm or luck. Grandma Rose's quiet guidance throughout the process had been invaluable. Her wisdom, her encouragement, and her subtle mentorship had allowed me to transform humiliation into empowerment, anger into strategy, and invisibility into undeniable presence. I had finally shown them who I really was. After the confrontation, life changed. I continued to strengthen my position, pursue my own goals, and live a life defined by my own achievements, not by the opinions or favoritism of others. Every success reminded me of the months of preparation, the careful planning, and the strategic patience that had allowed me to claim what was rightfully mine. I realized that true revenge is not about cruelty or hatred. It is about precision, patience, intelligence, and self-empowerment. It is about transforming humiliation into opportunity, mistakes into strategy, and underestimation into undeniable authority. And in that moment, I knew I had succeeded in every sense of the word. After the confrontation, the atmosphere in the house was tense, but charged with clarity. My parents could no longer ignore the truth I had presented. Their expressions shifted constantly: first, shock, then guilt, and finally, a reluctant acknowledgement of the mistakes they had made over the years. Every glance, every hesitation, confirmed that my carefully planned strategy had worked. I had turned the table completely. Alex, however, was the one I had been most curious about. He had always relied on charm, luck, and the perception of effortless success. Now, confronted with facts he couldn't ignore, he faltered. His confidence, which had once seemed unshakable, crumbled before my eyes. I watched as the realization set in. His so-called victories were hollow, his favoritism-based privileges exposed, and the very foundation of his self-assurance shattered. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I let the weight of the evidence and the inevitability of the truth speak for itself. The silence in the room was more powerful than any argument or outburst I could have made. My parents struggled to reconcile their past behavior with the undeniable proof I had presented. Alex, for the first time, had to confront the reality that intelligence, preparation, and strategy could outmatch charm and recklessness. Grandma Rose watched quietly, her presence steady and reassuring. She had guided me through the months of preparation without interfering, trusting that I would execute the plan with precision and patience. Now, seeing the outcome, her subtle smile confirmed what I had suspected all along. I had succeeded brilliantly. She had always known I was capable. Now the rest of the family finally had no choice but to acknowledge it. The fallout from the confrontation extended beyond just emotions. My parents began reevaluating their financial decisions and sought advice on correcting oversights I had exposed. Alex faced the uncomfortable truth that his prior advantages were not a reflection of skill but of luck and favoritism. I remained composed throughout, offering guidance when necessary but always maintaining control of the narrative. It was clear that the roles had reversed. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, and Alex was no longer the untouchable favorite. The social ramifications were just as significant. Family, friends, distant relatives, and even professional acquaintances noticed the change in dynamics. They saw me as competent, intelligent, and strategic, someone who had quietly transformed humiliation into empowerment. My victory wasn't just personal, it was public, undeniable, and permanent. In the weeks that followed, I focused on solidifying my achievements. I pursued opportunities I had long dreamed of, applied skills I had developed during the months of preparation, and built a life independent of my family's judgment. Every success reminded me of the careful planning, patience, and intelligence that had allowed me to reach this point. I was no longer defined by their favoritism or their narrow expectations. I had claimed my place, on my own terms. Alex struggled to adjust. He had taken for granted that his confidence, charm, and the support of our parents would carry him indefinitely. Now, with the evidence I had presented, he faced reality. His arrogance had been replaced by humility, and in some moments, even respect for the methodical way I had orchestrated my plan. He began to understand, painfully, that true power lies in strategy, patience, and intelligence, not in entitlement or superficial success. My parents, too, faced their reckoning. They could no longer dismiss my achievements or compare me unfavorably. To Alex, I had demonstrated that the definition of success they had imposed was limited, biased, and flawed. They began to acknowledge not only my capabilities but also the mistakes they had made in undervaluing me. Their pride in Alex remained, but it was tempered by the undeniable recognition of my own intelligence and accomplishments. Grandma, Rose remained my anchor throughout this transformation. Her wisdom and guidance had been critical at every stage, from the spark of inspiration after the humiliating party to the patient gathering of evidence, the subtle psychological strategy, and the final confrontation. She had taught me the greatest lesson. True empowerment and revenge are not about anger or destruction. They are about strategy, patience, and demonstrating your worth in ways that leave no room for doubt. As time passed, I continued to build my life. I pursued professional success, cultivated meaningful relationships, and strengthened my own skills and independence. I no longer measured myself against Alex or sought validation from my parents. I had proven, beyond question, that I was capable, intelligent, and unstoppable. The humiliation of that party became a distant memory, replaced by pride, confidence, and satisfaction. I also reflected on the lessons learned. I realized that revenge, when executed with patience and strategy, is not just about proving someone wrong, it's about reclaiming your own power. It's about transforming adversity into strength, humiliation into preparation, and doubt into undeniable achievement. By the end, I had not only demonstrated my worth to my family but also reshaped my own life, setting a foundation for success and independence that no one could undermine. Looking back, I understood that every insult, every comparison, every dismissive comment from my parents had been a catalyst. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had given me the perfect opportunity to rise. I had turned years of frustration into months of preparation, and months of preparation into a moment of undeniable triumph. Alex eventually began to respect the meticulous approach I had taken. He understood that my success was not accidental, was the result of intelligence, patience, and unwavering determination. Our relationship shifted subtly, from rivalry and jealousy to a cautious acknowledgement of equality. He remained my brother, but the dynamic had changed forever. My parents, finally, began to see me as an equal, someone whose capabilities could no longer be ignored. The favoritism that had once defined our family dynamics had been replaced by recognition and, ultimately, respect. They had learned, in the most undeniable way possible, that underestimating me had been a mistake that could not be repeated. Grandma Rose's words echoed through every stage of this journey. Patience, strategy, intelligence. That is how you show them who you really are. I had followed her guidance flawlessly. The revenge I had sought was not destructive or vengeful, it was empowering, precise, and transformative. I had reclaimed my dignity, my authority, and my future. In the end, I realized that true victory is not about money, status, or humiliation. It is about reclaiming your own power and proving your worth on your own terms. The party, the envelope, the cruel words, they were not the end of my story. They were the beginning, and I had written the ending myself. From that moment on, I lived with confidence, independence, and pride. I had turned humiliation into empowerment, anger into strategy, and invisibility into undeniable presence. I was no longer the overlooked daughter. I was Rachel, unstoppable, intelligent, and unshakable. And I had shown my family exactly who I really was.